All right. Well, I want to welcome everyone to today's joint event between the Kansas City Industrial Council and Bridging the Gaps Green Business Network. I am Leslie Barlin, and I'm the Green Business Network Program Manager, and I also have the great pleasure of serving on the KCIC Sustainability Committee. Before I turn it over to Zach Sweets with Evergy, who's our moderator for today's event, I want to quickly go over a few details about this event and highlight some of our upcoming programs too. First, everyone should have entered Zoom on mute. Please take a second and make sure that your microphone is off so that we can keep background noise to a minimum. We would, however, love for you to have your video on so that Zach and our panelists can see everyone. And as we get going, we hope you'll have some questions for our panel. If you do have a question, please type it into the chat feature that you can find located at the bottom of your screen in the toolbar. And as we get going, and if time allows, we might switch over to live questions as well. If you're having any technical issues using Zoom, you can chat me and I'll do my best to try to help. And finally, we are recording this webinar, and within a few days, we'll hopefully have it up on our website for everybody to access. Okay, so that is it for the housekeeping stuff. And I want to talk a little bit about some of our upcoming programs. Doing a quick plug for the KCIC, we just opened up our annual call for nominations for the Sustainability Awards Breakfast. Things will be a little different this year as we take the awards ceremony virtual. But this pandemic isn't going to stop us from recognizing and celebrating all of the great projects that KCIC members and partners and clients have done over this past year. So if you have or know of a project that you think should be recognized, please let us know about it by submitting an application on KCIC's website, which is kciconline.com. It's a pretty easy and painless application process, and it's a great way to spread awareness and get some kudos for the great work that you all are doing. And then next up for Green Business Network, we'll be continuing the conversation from today on energy efficiency with a webinar that we're doing on August 27th, but this time it's going to be from the perspective of green teams. You know, even with small or non-existent budgets, company green teams can move the needle on energy efficiency in the workplace. And we'll be taking a look at some of the low or no cost strategies that your teams can implement to start the conversation on energy efficiency with employees and upper management, and also to set the foundation for some of those larger investments. And you can register for this event by going to greenbusinessnetworkkc.org, which I've highlighted here in yellow. And if these programs sound interesting to you, we hope that if you're not already, you'll consider becoming a member in either the Kansas City Industrial Council or the Green Business Network, or both. I've put up our respective websites here where you can learn more about what a membership can offer and the work that the membership supports. And whoops. So that gets us to the reason that you're all here today, our event titled Emptier Buildings Eat Energy Too. We actually started planning this event long before the pandemic started. We wanted to do an event around the energy that buildings use and the importance of evaluating how efficiently your building system operates. And now, as many buildings are sitting empty or are still largely unoccupied, this event took on a whole new perspective. So we'll be getting into some of the ways that COVID-19 is affecting energy management too. I think we've assembled a great panel for you today. And so I am going to turn it over to Zach Sweets with Evergy. Let him introduce himself and have our panelists introduce themselves. And Zach, it is all yours.
All right, thanks, Leslie. And I appreciate you having me here to moderate this discussion today. We have with us 4 panelists that are really going to be our experts for this conversation. And with us, we have, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves, but briefly, just a quick overview. We have Tom Corso, the VP of Operations with MC Realty, Eric Cruzon, Senior Business Development with TRC Companies, Lauren Roberts, President and CEO of CFM Distributors, and Chris Hayes with the Office of Environmental Quality with the City of Kansas City, Missouri. So let me just go ahead and toss it over to Tom to start us off, to introduce himself and kind of talk about what brings you to the panel today.
Sure, thanks, Zach. Tom Corso, been with MC, I'm going on my 25th year. My background's mechanical engineering, and I oversee the day-to-day operations of buildings. So HVAC, lighting, that's, you know, all in our wheelhouse as far as what we do, and control the buildings and operate them for our owners the best we can and the most efficient we can.
Thank you.
I'm Eric.
Go ahead.
This is Eric Cruzan. I'm with TRC Companies. We are the implementer of Evergy's business energy savings program. I've been in the energy efficiency world for over 40 years, and have worked on several different programs, and really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this panel today.
I'm Lauren Roberts. I'm president and CEO of CFM Distributors. We're headquartered in the West Bottoms, and we are a wholesale distributor of heating and air conditioning products. So much like Tom, that's kind of in our wheelhouse. And I'm going to be talking about it from our side of things, where we sell products to contractors, all the way from residential to light commercial to heavy commercial and applied products on large buildings, hospitals, school districts, et cetera. So I've been with the company 16 years, and we have 6 locations throughout the Midwest to serve the contractors in Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and Iowa.
I'm Chris Hayes, Sustainability Analyst for the City of Kansas City in the Office of Environmental Quality. Mainly in charge of the Energy Empowerment Ordinance, which requires businesses with large buildings to do the benchmarking.
Thank you all. And today we're really going to be covering a lot of what they each kind of briefly talked about are their areas of expertise. So we'll have examples of how energy efficiency is good for business, and why it's even more important today, as Leslie kind of kicked off talking about how this conversation has shifted and evolved given the times. And also we'll have a conversation a bit about specifically with HVAC. And as we see that HVAC accounts for roughly 40% of commercial building use, this is that will be a piece of the conversation that will be very important. But we'll also highlight, and this is partially where Eric comes in, we'll also highlight some resources available, so that you all, as you look at your building's energy use and efficiency, can get an idea of what resources are out there. And obviously COVID is the conversation for everyone. So without further ado, I will go ahead and jump into our first question. And Lauren, this is actually for you. How much energy does HVAC equipment use?
Well, in simple terms, you just hit on it a minute ago, but it uses about 40 to 50% of utility bills come from HVAC operating costs. So that makes it very important to make sure that you have super high efficient equipment and different controls and options on your systems to make sure that they're operating at their peak efficiency.
And Lauren, what you mentioned hitting peak efficiency. What are some, what can we do to make sure that we hit our, with our HVAC equipment, hit that peak efficiency?
Well, it's really important to change your filters regularly and have regular planned maintenance on your HVAC systems. And then, as I mentioned briefly, consider controls, especially on your commercial systems for office buildings like we're talking about today. Because if you have these control systems on there, they'll allow you to turn on one unit at a time and not have all of your units come on during the peak part of the day where there's a ton of need for the cooling in the summer or the heating in the winter. And if you can alternate those units operating, you can save yourself a lot of money that way. So those would be the 3 things. Again, change your filters regularly, have planned maintenance regularly, and then use control systems.
Seems like everything is maintenance, and it's the smallest things that really get us the furthest. And Eric, we're curious, are you seeing a decrease, an increase, or maybe no change at all in energy efficient upgrades during this time?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. It's been somewhat surprising that we have not seen a decrease. Not knowing how the marketplace was going to be able to respond to energy efficiency opportunities, but we really have seen a steady flow of energy efficiency projects, and really they're kind of two kinds: lighting projects, and I think some cases they're taking advantage of the unoccupied buildings to do retrofit projects that can be difficult when they're occupied. And far more activity is going on the HVAC side. Many of those are beyond just equipment replacements that happen on a regular basis, but many are looking at the air side in their buildings, ventilation, and a lot of this is getting prepared or activating measures to mitigate COVID-19.
Okay, and kudos to you. You did not break it all as your coworker came in with your four-legged coworker there. But Lauren, Eric kind of set you up for the next question. What trends are you seeing in the HVAC industry related to the pandemic?
Yeah, due to the pandemic, we've seen a large uptick in indoor air quality product sales, which includes a lot of different types of products. But on commercial systems, we've sold much more of a product called the iWave C, and that's an ionizer that has now been proven to kill COVID-19. So we've seen a bunch of sales in that product. And then we've also seen more sales in ultraviolet lights, ventilation, and other air filtration products like Eric alluded to. All of these things help, bring in fresh air and clean the air that we are recirculating in buildings. And we've just seen with more people sheltering in place or not spending their disposable income on vacations and other business type expenses, they're focusing more on the quality of their air and the comfort, whether it be in their home or office building.
Thank you. And just a real quick reminder, I saw it in the chat, and I'll just say, if you have any questions for our panelists, please be sure to submit them through the chat feature. I think it's down here if everyone's screen is the same as mine. But the next question that we have is actually for Chris. Chris, with some of these programs and some of these things that we're able to do, let's talk about could you talk about what the city has been doing with its energy empowerment ordinance and which buildings are included in it? And, further, what is the city doing with that information?
Okay, good questions. So there's ordinance was created in June of 2015, and it was for the energy and water usage of buildings to be benchmarked and then shared with the city. The goal is to help businesses and residents save money on their utility bills and become more efficient, and then create energy efficiency jobs. The information can help local utilities and the city government target future financial projects. The buildings that are required for this, all municipal buildings of 10,000 square feet and above, and then for the commercial institutional buildings, 50,000 square feet and above. And we put out an annual report each year with our results from the companies that have submitted their data.
And Tom, when we're looking at energy efficient upgrades, what successes have you seen, and do you have any possible examples resulting in savings?
Sure. I mean, as Eric stated, the low hanging fruit's always been lighting, especially like garage lighting and exterior lighting. But in recent years, with newer technologies, wireless sensors, and connectivity among light fixtures, we're seeing it more on the interior lights, where the project makes sense, going with the rebate and the controls. And then a couple of examples of not so common things that we used the rebate for was we took 2 hydraulic elevators that had 45 horsepower motors in them, and we changed them out to a traction elevator that had a 7 horsepower motor. And so each one was about 28 kilowatts in savings. And we also reduced the risk of having an environmental issue with the steel shaft, 6 stories in the ground full of hydraulic oil. So that was a huge success for us. And then the other one was Union Station. We took over Union Station about 10 years ago, and about 4 years ago, we were looking at the building automation system. It was the original when they renovated 20 something years ago. And it was never upgraded, no it was basically a glorified time clock. So we went in, put in a whole new automation system with a chiller optimization package, an analytics package, and a huge custom rebate from Evergy. And just during COVID, we've been seeing, using that system, we've been seeing savings over $30,000 a month, you know, by taking advantage of the analytics of that system. So it's been really good for us.
And that's incredible, significant savings. That could also lead to further energy efficiency upgrades, and which leads me to my question that I'm curious, maybe Lauren can shed some light. When should those attending consider upgrading?
For commercial buildings, we typically recommend considering planned HVAC replacements about every 10 to 12 years. This makes sure that they operate still in their most efficient capacity and not get too old. And this has been made more affordable in recent years. At the end of 2018, there was a change to the tax code, section 179, that now allows for HVAC systems on commercial buildings to be immediately expensed instead of the previous rule that was they had to be depreciated over a 39-year period. So obviously it makes the expense more an easier pill to swallow, I guess you could say, for a building owner or business owner, since they can expense it immediately and not have to take the 39-year depreciation, which well exceeds the life of a normal HVAC system. So it didn't make a lot of sense that way before.
So we're getting an understanding of some benchmarking, figuring out what some folks can look at for energy efficiency, and both of you really hit on it. And I would love to turn to Eric next. Eric, what's the process? So we're looking for big efficiencies that lead to savings, and we're looking at some of these some of the work that needs to be done. What is the process in Evergy's rebate program and incentives program? And can you give us an overview of how that program actually works?
Be happy to, and everyone's been speaking my language, so thank you for showing the case studies of how the program has helped you. In essence, just to get a 10,000 foot level, there are 4 categories of energy efficiency incentives. And to not make it overly complicated or boring, the categories are standard incentives, which are prescriptive in nature. In other words, using lighting as an example, if you replace a fluorescent lamp with an LED lamp, you get X number of dollars for that lamp retrofit. So that's standard incentives. There's a variety of those. Also include food service equipment and the like. The second category are custom incentives, and the easiest way to describe that, if it's not standard, it's custom. But the difference with custom is it is a prescriptive based incentive. In other words, it's based upon, a performance based incentive, and it's based upon the actual energy savings. So the incentive is based on kilowatt hours saved. So there's a number of different cents per kilowatt hour that are applied to support projects of a variety of sizes, including chiller replacements, building automation systems, which are an extremely good energy efficiency measure. In the industrial segment, more efficient production equipment can also qualify for that. Changes in ventilation systems, et cetera. So those 2 categories are fairly common for application of incentives. The third category is new construction, and as it prescribes, it is an incentive program for new construction commercial buildings and industrial buildings. There's a baseline energy code that's applied for the IECC 2012 as our baseline, and so your improvements for design have to exceed that code by at least 10%. So better lighting, more efficient HVAC, production equipment, et cetera. And there's an application process, including a design team meeting that's associated with new construction, so that we have an opportunity to work with you to optimize the incentives for the energy efficiency measures you're deploying in a new building. And finally, and this is a program that I'm kind of overseeing right now, is the retro commissioning program. And they borrow the name commissioning from maritime building boats to say that when a boat was commissioned, it was seaworthy. And in terms of buildings, retro commissioning is the concept of bringing a building's efficiency or a system's efficiency, in the case of industrial refrigeration or compressed air, up to its original efficient performance, or as close to it as we can get, or if possible, exceeding that. And I think the one that is the one of the three categories of compressed air, industrial refrigeration, and large building retrocommissioning, it's the large building retrocommissioning that is getting the most attention right now. It is, if you're not familiar with the process, again, it is a process where an engineering team will walk through the building, identify low cost, no cost measures, that's the focus, and put together a study that outlines all of those potential measures, the savings associated with that, and then there's an implementation to do the installation of those particular measures. Our program helps underwrite the costs associated with two sets of incentives, one for the study cost, the other for the implementation cost. And it's specifically germane today when we start talking about preparing buildings for COVID mitigation strategy deployment. So I generally say to people, how efficient is your building and how do you know? And in this particular case, retro commissioning will help you understand how that, the answer to that question. So there's a process for applications, and I'm not going to bore you with the process per se, but we'll recommend that you go to the Evergy website under the Ways to Save tab, select the business category, and you'll see descriptions and outlines and access to the applications and brochures that outline all of these programs.
Thank you, Eric. Tom, we'll actually go back to you on that note. After talking about the program and what's available, what were the key factors that initiated MC Realty's investment in energy efficient upgrades?
Sure. For us, there's two main driving factors for energy efficiency. One is reduced operating expenses, and the other is to have a sustainable asset or facility for years to come. So as far as reduced operating expenses, we've been doing that for as long as I've worked here. You know, you have a building that has fixed costs. Your debt is fixed, your insurance is fixed, your taxes are fixed. Utilities, you have some room to move where you can reduce those operating expenses. So with the rebate program, it makes projects make sense. You know, I went back, getting ready for this, went back and looked in our records, and we've been doing rebates since 2006, and we've collected over $3 million in rebates from utility companies for our owners. But a lot of these projects would have never happened if we didn't have that rebate money in there to bring down the ROI. So it's really benefited us.
And to kind of get to these points, we've talked about and touched on multiple times the importance of benchmarking and tracking data. So Chris, I'm curious with your role, if a property does not yet track and benchmark its energy use over time, why is now a good time to start?
So now's a good time because some businesses may or may not have the free time. So it's a good time if they've got that free time to go in and do that. Using the EPA's portfolio manager tool, it's web-based, so you can do it from anywhere, so whether you're at home or in the office. You can go back and do previous years. So you can go back and build your baseline, and right now we're pulling it, asking for the data from last year. So we're not looking at 2020's data yet, so that'll be next year. And so you're able to get your baseline of how your building was before COVID and people working from home. And then you can kind of see next year when you're looking at it, what's changed and what can you do differently. You'll be able to see where your spikes are at and your dips and your energy usage.
And Lauren, we're building an understanding here. We know what the program is. We can understand what drives individuals to want to find energy efficient equipment, but what are the most common reasons to choose a high efficiency versus standard efficiency equipment?
Well, at a basic level, to save on utility bills, and then Along with that, there's more comfort that comes along with high efficiency equipment, because usually there are options on those like 2-stage compressors, which run at 1 speed in hotter months and then another speed in milder months and provide a more even temperature, which also ends up increasing the dehumidification effects in the summertime, which results in much cooler and more comfortable space in the summer months. And then, you know, Tom touched on it. The upfront costs with this are a little bit higher, but those long range operating costs actually go down significantly with the higher efficiency equipment, and then provide a better return on investment in the end.
Okay, and Eric, I'm curious. Chris had mentioned, you know, now is a great time to get a good comparison from last year to this year when we're talking about COVID and comparing energy usage. But are you seeing clients, or are clients finding a significant drop in energy use simply due to lower occupancy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my favorite answer for a situation like this is it depends. The dependence is solely based upon the efficiency of the building and their operating systems. And I have seen both buildings where, because of the building automation system, the efficient equipment, and how the building is managed, they are able to proportionately reduce energy consumption more closely to the occupancy levels. So they're doing a good job in making that work. I've also been asked to visit buildings where they may only have 40 or 50% occupancy in the building, but they have seen almost no drop in energy usage. And in this case, it's typically because they lack building controls. They have ventilation systems that are not performing perhaps at their optimum efficiency, or maybe over ventilating the building based upon the occupancy level. And we see a lot of those types of symptoms in older buildings that really don't have the level of control over the operation of their systems that they should. So it's kind of a mixed situation. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, but certainly the building efficiency, the approach to how the buildings are managed are really critical to see whether or not they can see a reduction in energy consumption through the operation of the building and isolation of certain parts of the building.
And Tom, when we're looking at managing buildings, we understand that while operators cannot simply turn off an entire commercial property, what are some ways to leverage efficiencies to reduce the utility burden, the cost burden during times of low occupancy due to COVID?
Sure. When this first started, say back in mid-March, you know, and originally it was going to be like, maybe everybody thought it was going to be maybe 2 months or, you know, whatever. And, you know, I said to my staff, I said, you know, we're going to have owners at the end of those 2 months asking how much money we saved on energy because the buildings were empty. But really, we never really shut off our buildings. You know, they're still running, but we did do some things that, you know, in the programming, we put in global set points. So, you know, not every thermostat is, you know, for this guy's office, one temperature. We just put in one global set point for the whole building. We adjusted the run times to, most of our buildings have optimal start and stop already in them, programmed in them. But what we did was we adjusted those algorithms so the buildings didn't exactly start up. You know, with optimal start, they have to start enough time to get to lease temperature, you know, by the time what the lease says. We adjusted those so they just start at, you know, what the lease said, you know, so the air conditioner would be on, but not necessarily at that temperature. And then it's just been, you know, tweaking things, and, you know, we still have not seen a huge rush back to the office. So we're, you know, some buildings, you know, that we are getting occupancy, we're following BOMA and ASHRAE guidelines as far as running the buildings 24/7. You know, they're one of the guidelines is to purge the building every night for 2 hours with 100% outside air. Well, you all know in the Midwest, 100% outside air with, you know, 60% humidity is going to ramp up your cooling load rather than bring it down. So it's just a game of, getting the comfort zone and also being judicious with, COVID, but also with your energy efficiency.
And Tom, quick follow-up. You had mentioned just getting that, making that switch from a high occupancy to a low occupancy. And conversations are continually going on about when offices might be back. So how are you preparing for the needs of possibly making that quick switch between a high and a low occupancy level?
Well, me personally, I don't see that happening like immediately. I see it as a gradual return to work, and we've seen it from a lot of our tenants. They're just bringing in certain people at certain times. But also, I think it's just programming changes in the software, and those are already in place, and it's just, changing the program to adjust for that.
Thank you. Eric, what kind of recommendations are you seeing coming out for buildings to make buildings safer? And what effect is that going to have, if any, on energy consumption?
I guess the 10,000-foot answer is, I wish I could answer with greater certainty. There are definitely certain recommendations that are best to follow right now. And part of the question is, how long will we be facing this type of a pandemic? That will have an impact on decisions that are made about capital equipment. But all that being said, the recommendations that we're seeing coming out of the CDC and primarily ASHRAE, which is a great resource, just talk about the fact that it's an airborne transmission of a disease with infectious aerosols, and you need to dilute those by introducing as much outside air, capturing them with filters, disinfecting the airstream beyond the filtration, and if needed in certain parts of the buildings, to pressurize them using negative pressure to isolate them from the rest of the building. And that kind of goes to the question of cross-contamination within buildings and all of that. It's a far more complicated process in large commercial buildings, particularly if they have large open spaces, to make sure that you are moving sufficient air, ventilating effectively, avoiding what they call bubbles of circulation, where the air is not really being exhausted, but rather just recirculated. And all of those factors, all of those approaches have an impact on increasing energy use. Additional ventilation, using germicidal UV or bipolar ionization to treat the air, the installation of more efficient filters, higher MERV rated filters, will have an impact on creating greater resistance in the duct system, so the fans have to work a little harder. All of those things will have an impact on increasing energy, unfortunately. And it creates quite a paradox for what we do, as well as what the building owners are attempting to do to manage their energy costs while still mitigating the pandemic.
And Chris, what considerations need to be taken into account if benchmarking is done now while buildings are at a lower occupancy rate?
So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So if you've got buildings that are being shut down and not being used, or water usage is down, electricity is down, then you're going to see like an improved score. Like Eric and Tom mentioned, with the ASHRAE, they want you to run your HVAC more often, doing the purge and stuff with the air, outside air. So you might be using more energy that way. So it's not really a good year to compare 2020's data versus previous years, because it could be all over the board.
And Eric, kind of going back to you, when we're looking at empty or emptier commercial facilities, what are a few measures that can be enacted immediately to drive down energy use and costs? And further, what are some simple steps that can be done to make it a significant impact on energy use in buildings? I'll just let you kind of go from there.
Sure. Yeah. The paradox I talked about earlier is that balance between our challenge with COVID today and and having an impact on reducing energy efficiency. For buildings that are in some form of reduced occupancy, there's no such, I've been through a number of buildings, 10-story buildings where there are 5 people in the building, and it's usually the building personnel, management staff. And you can't shut everything down, as was mentioned earlier. And it really becomes a matter of what level of control you can deploy with your systems. The examples that Tom was giving are spot on the types of things that you should consider and what you can do. Unfortunately, every building is unique, from a configuration of the HVAC system, the ability of the ventilation and outside air intakes to reach some of the recommended levels, that they cause some difficulty in being able to say these are simple measures that you can deploy. If possible in the building, if you can implement free cooling at times, that's fine. It gets back to what Tom mentioned earlier. When you've got high humidity, that's not necessarily a very cost-effective measure. You can increase your cooling set points for the building gradually so that you can reduce the energy consumption a bit related to that. If possible, you can isolate unoccupied spaces from space conditioning, but there are some risks associated with that. You will still need to purge those buildings, get the air out of there and replace it with fresh air. But there may be a way to reduce some of that cooling requirement. The simple things like eliminating unnecessarily plug loads, just unplug, shut off things that you don't need. And you could consider reducing operating hours, as I've seen in some buildings. They're opening later and closing earlier as another way of trying to mitigate those costs. And the last thing I can think of, some buildings have been using demand control ventilation, where you start up the system later in the day and earlier in the evening. Those can be good strategies from an energy efficiency standpoint, but it runs headlong into the ventilation requirements. So that's something I would recommend. If you have that strategy in your building, you take a hard look at the scheduling you're doing there to make a determination if you can really perform that effectively. The last thing I'll mention in passing, and it kind of touches on what Chris talked about earlier, the benchmarking side of things. We support and are actively promoting retro commissioning. I mentioned that earlier in terms of our program offerings, but retro commissioning is one good way to try to balance and find opportunities for low cost, no cost energy efficiency measures that can be deployed in a building. And in turn, it also, once you have gone through the necessary elimination of deficiencies in the building, it's a great time to be able to then say, okay, the building is at its peak efficiency. Now, what measures do we deploy relative to pandemic control? And that way, it's starting from a better location. And the benchmarking that Chris talked about is a fundamental part of the retro commissioning process. In fact, we require either an energy utilization index or a portfolio manager score to help us understand the overall efficiency of the building, and then being able to move forward with implementation of measures that will help save energy and reduce that, as well as giving a firm foundation for looking at COVID mitigation measures.
Thanks, Eric. And as I'm watching the time and watching the questions that we have, I just want to remind everybody to please submit, if you have any questions for the panelists, your questions in the question box. And as we get through our predetermined questions, I'll be sure to ask our panelists your question. I know we have one waiting, so please feel free to send in more. But Chris, I want to go to you. And Eric kind of touched on it, but talk about the importance from the program that you administer and that you function, that functions with you as an analyst. Why is benchmarking so important? Again, Eric touched on it, but why is it so important for your building's energy use, and what kind of tools are out there to help building owner do just that?
Okay, that's a good question. So let's just get to the base of it. Benchmarking, it's measuring energy usage and comparing it to similar type buildings. So you could measure your building, but if you don't know what other buildings are doing similar, you're not going to know where you stand. So by doing the benchmarking, you can see where you rate versus the other buildings. Good tools to use, utility reports that you get, and the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. Those go hand in hand, so that's how you get your Energy Star score. There's several associations and organizations out there that can help with that, like the ISO 50001, Standard for Energy Management Systems. There's also National Association of Energy Service Companies, and some others out there. There's also third-party companies and tools out there that work. Eric mentioned some of those. They can help monitor and automate your HVAC systems, building controls. Some of these also work with portfolio managers, so they'll automatically load your data into it. So it saves a step that a lot of people do it manually. Some of the bigger companies, corporations out there, they have these third-party energy companies that will submit the data for them. And then you check with the utility companies, like Eric mentioned, there's incentives out there to work on being more efficient.
And Tom, how has staffing affected your ability to keep up with the empty properties?
Well, our staff really, their hours haven't changed. They continue to do their daily rounds, preventive maintenance, as they would do if the building was fully occupied. They're also going through the facilities every other day. They run all the potable water systems to prevent bacteria to build up. And then they're doing like special projects, painting machine rooms, cleaning, replacing things that, could not normally be done during the day, doing like some small lighting retrofits, things like that.
Okay, and finally, Eric, when we're looking at parts of maintaining a empty space and what building automation systems are you seeing? Are you seeing an increase in their popularity during this time?
Actually, I think what we're seeing is in part maybe the final realization that it's time to install a building automation system. We've seen several applications that have come through of late in looking at upgrading the building automation systems to provide a greater range of features. We've also had the applications to replace pneumatic control system in buildings with direct digital control and an energy management system. So it's really pointing to the recognition that because of the combination of COVID and energy costs, it's necessary. In fact, it's beyond the time when most people should be deploying building automation systems to control their buildings. It's really going to be, having a building automation system is really the only guaranteed way that you can control ventilation and air change requirements on a regular basis, on a scheduled basis, and then on an effective basis. So in closing around that, when I entered the industry doing energy efficiency, the one thing was drilled into my head from a commercial building perspective is controls are everything. Controlling the building, being able to deploy various strategies are the key to really keeping your energy costs under control.
Thanks, Eric. And I saw, Lauren, I'm going to go off script here. I saw you nodding your head. Is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I just agree with Eric totally on that. We've seen a lot of building automation systems that are simple plug-and-play style systems come out on the market over the last few years for smaller commercial applications that are very easy for a normal heating and air conditioning contractor to install. But then there are more complicated pneumatic control systems and complex control systems for larger buildings that you usually would want to use a controls contractor for. But we've definitely seen the uptick on the wide variety of controls products out there. And they were once thought of as these really tough systems to figure out for an average contractor, but it's really opened up new opportunities for some of the smaller buildings that could take advantage of the benefits of a building automation system.
Thank you. We'll turn now to the questions from our attendees, and one question from an attendee. Eric, I believe this will probably be your area of expertise is they actually work with a high energy user. And at one of their administrative buildings, they wanted to explore the option to change out existing light fixtures and go to LED fixtures. However, because they get such a great rate through Evergy, no need to plug, the payback is 97.5 years on that incentive. And so how do they sell the idea to their leadership when the investment does not appear to offer much of an incentive for payback?
Well, I would want to take another look at the system, the calculations, unless this is a particularly unique situation, which do happen. Typically, we'll see the paybacks on a lighting project less than 8 years. And that includes some of the industrial fixtures that are more expensive than traditional commercial fixtures. But we'd be happy to take a look, work with you to refine and see the best approach for the building. Just as a comparison, I think the worst payback I saw on a project was lighting project was something like 30 years, but it was a unique project because it was at a uranium processing plant, and they had to include the disposal cost of the fixtures in the overall project cost because they couldn't just throw them away. They had to dispose of them because they were radioactive. So a 98-year payback seems extreme to me, and I certainly invite anyone to follow up with me on the project when we talk further.
Thank you, and I have their information, so I'll make sure that gets to you, Eric. Another question that we have, and I imagine this is open to the panel, so whomever feels the spirit, please jump in. But the plug loads have been mentioned, and some occupants may want to bring in their own HEPA or UV filters at their desk, similar to space heaters in the winter. What advice do you have on managing occupant behavior to prevent plug load increases?
We have in our tenant rule books, we don't allow heaters, fountains, hot plates, coffee pots, none of that. We just say it's not allowed.
In our case, for the filtration type products that you alluded to there, Zach, we tend to highly discourage people's individual products at their workstations and everything. And then we look at what types of centralized options we can add to give them those same benefits, and then in turn give the same benefits to all of our employees. So rather than take up that whole load on the case-by-case basis in each workstation.
You know, I suppose I would add to that the recommendations we can see coming out of the CDC and ASHRAE and others are recommending, even within office spaces, the use of masks and less concentration of people within spaces, so greater distancing between workstations. I think a lot of that will mitigate the need, or certainly reduce the exposure that the personal air cleaning equipment would perhaps, and I emphasize perhaps, affect. You know, the studies are out there indicating that 6 feet is the critical distances for most airborne contaminants, and treatment with a portable unit may be placed there. You may feel well, but it may not have any impact on the airflow coming from workstations around you.
Well, thank you. I do not see any more questions in the chat feature, so I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists for their time and their insights and bringing their knowledge to this conversation. I know personally I've learned quite a bit. I am not the expert, but it's great to learn from the experts. So at this time, I will go ahead and pass it right back to Leslie. And before I do, I just want to say thank you to all the attendees for joining us. Leslie?
Thanks, Zach. And yeah, I want to echo that same thank you to our panelists and to you, Zach. You did a great job moderating us today. So thank you for for keeping us on discussion. Attendees, as we're wrapping up, I just want to say that we'd love to get your feedback on today's event. So shortly after this, I'll be sending out an email with a link to a survey. And if you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes to just provide some feedback to us, that would be great. It really helps us in being able to continue providing quality programming that you're interested in. And then I just want to remind you to submit an application for the Sustainability Awards by September 11th. And also we'll hope to see you at the webinar that Green Business Network is doing on August 27th. I'll include links in that same email that I send out right after this to both of those so that you can find those if you want. And with that, I think we'll end today's session, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.